welcome to the newspaper roundtable panel. I'm going to go through a couple things and then we'll get started. So land acknowledgement, cartoon Crossroads Columbus acknowledges that the ancient ancestors of the Eastern Woodlands tribes, now referred to as the Adena and Hopewell cultures, inhabited the land we know as Ohio. Their descendants include the living nations of the Shawnee, Miami, Wyandot, Delaware, and Seneca Cayuga. We honor and respect the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this place where we gather. We also want to thank our sponsors, including the Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Ohio Arts Council, White Castle, and UBS. That's amazing. I'm Shena Wolf. I'm the Director of Comics Development at Andrews McMeel Universal, and I'd like to introduce our panel of awesome newspaper cartoonists. So first up is Peter Gallagher, who does Heathcliff. And next there's Steenz, who does Heart of the City for Andrews McMeel. And then there's Jim Keefe, who does art for Sally Forth. Yay! And then Barbara Brandon-Croft, who does Where I'm Coming From. Yay! Okay, and then we have a slideshow of their art that's just going to keep cycling through. We're not going to be speaking to the art. So now that we all know each other, let's get started. So we've got a wonderful mix of experiences on this panel. So we have people who were doing syndicated cartooning, like in the 90s, and which is for young people an unfathomably long time ago. And then we have people who have been doing them as recently as just a couple years ago getting started. So I think it's going to be fun to get these different perspectives because syndication has changed a lot so much. Every 10 years it changes, every 5 years it changes. It's amazing. So if you could kind of go through down the line briefly, how did you get started in cartooning and how did you get into syndicated comics? So Peter.
I always loved to draw. I grew up I was obsessed with it. I had to draw every day, kind of. And I come from a cartooning family. My two uncles were cartoonists, like John Gallagher, great cartoonist, and George Gately. They're brothers, and they started Heathcliff. And then when I graduated college, they asked if I would join the family business. I was a little reluctant because I got along great with them. I didn't want to ruin that. But then I started doing it. I apprenticed for a few years under them, then took it over, and they retired. And I felt like I went to cartooning graduate school, learning from them. And that's how I got into it. I felt very fortunate, and it was great learning from them. They were so cool. And I was very lucky to just step into it and start doing it.
And Steenz?
So I started doing Heart of the City in April of 2020, but I've been drawing for as long as I can remember. I've gone to school for drawing as well. I teach comics at Comics University. I teach at Webster University. So I've just been steeped in comics for a very long time. And it wasn't until I started working at my local comic book store where I realized that making comic books was a viable option for me. Whenever you don't see people that look like you, it never comes to mind as a thing that's possible. And so it wasn't until I actually saw, other Black femmes in comics where I was like, wait a second, what am I doing? Working at a comic book store, I should be making comics. And so, so that's how I really had that click in 2011. And since 2011, I've just been selling comics, teaching comics, making comics, editing comics.
Jim?
So I pretty much started going to school I grew up in Minnesota and was going to some art schools after high school. And in the 80s, comic books and such were not a thing to get into. It was fine art. It was real art. So you went to an art school, comic books were looked down upon. This is before graphic novels, before Mouse, before it started getting any kind of literary presence. But I found out about the Joe Kubert School, which had started in the 70s, just not too long before I entered. And I was like, oh my God, there's someplace I can go that I can learn this stuff. So long story short, I went to the Kubert School. When I graduated, the King Features was looking around for a colorist. They asked around to area schools, and the Kubert School was the only one that got second interviews because we knew the industry. Like, they wanted someone to do color guides. We knew how to do color guides. We didn't know just color theory. We knew color guides. So ended up getting the job at King Features, worked my ass off as far as just, anytime something became available, I did everything from fashion illustrations to filling in for George Evans when he was sick and did Secret Agent Corrigan. And then, once again, I want to cut this short because I think you should talk too. But eventually I submitted stuff for Flash Gordon when they were shopping around for someone new and ended up getting that strip. So that's how, once again, very Cliff Note version, how I got into syndication.
Barbara?
So we're older, so we have long stories. This is how it happens. But I did not know I was going to be a cartoonist growing up. I did like to draw. I did like all of that. I did go to school. I went to the Syracuse University, had a School of Visual and Performing Arts. I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I studied this and that and anything that occurred to me. And I came out of school. I left school, let's say it right, and got jobs. I didn't know. It wasn't until later that I was trying to get a job at a magazine, and I took my portfolio, and she's like, "You're kind of funny. You draw. Can you do a comic strip?" I was like, "Well, yeah." But I could say that because I grew up with my dad. Comics were all part of my life. My dad was one of the pioneer black cartoonists, and he had a comic strip called Luther from 1969 to 1980 something. And who knew that I was being trained all this time, because he had me put the electrotone, it was called Zipatone at the time. Yeah, he had me put the Zipatone on. And so I was like, okay, I colored in some of the silhouettes. And when he got sick one time, he hurt his back, and I did a week of my handwriting. So I had the experience, but so when somebody says, can I do a comic strip? I said, yeah. So I came up with it. But it didn't work out. The magazine folded, and then I sent to another magazine. That folded. No, it didn't fold. They gave me a job as a fashion and beauty writer, which was fun. I worked at Essence for a long time. And then my dad got us a letter from Detroit Free Press saying, do you know of any other black cartoonists? And that's when it was put to me, are you going to talk about being a cartoonist? You're going to be a cartoonist. And I was like, put on that cartoonist hat, and I sent my stuff out to all the syndicates. Got pleasantly best rejection letter from King Features. Yeah, that was the best one. The other ones, my dad's syndicate. But Universal Press, where she is now, that's what it's called then. Universal Press said, I think you got something, and they gave me a development deal, and then they signed me on in 1991.
I'm so glad that I said 90s because that was correct. I was like, oh, I just picked a number. So just sort of context for people who might not be as familiar. There used to be a lot of different syndicates in this space, and now it's really compressed. So there's only a few big ones. I work for Andrews McMeel Universal, which used to be Universal Press Syndicate, which is where Barbara was. And so full disclosure, like I work with Steenz on Heart of the City, but no favorites. only panel like information. So what are your favorite and least favorite things about syndication? Because syndication is a very specific kind of cartooning. With syndication, you're sending things in and it's published every day. Like it's every day, every Sunday, for years and years and years. It's not like, oh, we have a limited run, or we have like a 24-page comic. It is every day for decades, if you're lucky. That's what everyone is kind of hoping for. So like, to recap my question, favorite and least favorite thing about syndication?
You know, it's funny, what used to be my least favorite is now my favorite, and it's that it's every day. When I first took over Heathcliff, it's every single day. And if you don't keep up, it was a little daunting. It was like, I have to do something every day. But as I did it more, that became the thing that made it easier. Like, just because you have to do something every day, it was almost like less pressure. I felt like, well, I got to get something out. Even if it's terrible, I got to put it out. And it just freed me up to come up with wilder ideas. and led me down paths I didn't really think. So at first it was scary. Then it became my favorite thing. Now I love doing it every day. And I can't wait. Like, I usually, when I finish my work, I still work traditionally, and then I scan it in, I clean it up in Photoshop, and then I email it to my editor at Creator Syndicate. And they're great. I mean, I've never had them ever say anything except encouraging stuff, especially my editors. But then when I'm finished that night, I usually look at it on my phone to see it digitally, and I love looking at it, but I look at it that night, and then I'm on to the next thing. And I love that. I love moving on to the next thing. It's really cool. So,
Man, honestly, I have the same answer. The fact that it is both never ending and also never ending. You know, like on the one hand, I always have something to do in the morning. You know, I always have an idea of what's going to go into the comic. I never have to worry about what next project I have to do because I always have heart. You know, heart is always going to be there for me to write. On the other hand, heart is always there. And if I ever want to take a vacation, I have to work ahead, and I don't like working ahead. But I mean, I think it was a little daunting to begin with because I think in your first email, you said, this is a grueling job. And I was like, damn, okay. Like, really straight to the point. But honestly, I love that, you know? And because it is a daily comic strip, I get better at drawing every single time I do a comic. And it's wild to say, but the more you draw, the better you get. So I've seen my skill like skyrocket ever since I started Heart of the City because it's an everyday comic. I just have to get better at it. But I love it though, because it never ends, I never have to worry about, well, how am I going to wrap all of this up? I don't have to. They can keep getting into more and more school shenanigans and they can age as slowly as I want them to age.
Or not at all.
Or not, well, mine are going to be aging. I think, because you know, it takes place in middle school, and I think middle school's other definition is change, you know?
That's true.
And so I definitely want to make a point to make sure that these characters have birthdays, if they're not annual, maybe every 5 years they'll have a birthday. But I want to make sure that they are growing because I want readers to also grow with these characters because I grew up with For Better or For Worse. I grew up with, you know, Curtis and all of that, and I want to see them grow with me. So that's what I think about when I do those.
Jim?
I'm fascinated by her answer because I work on a legacy strip, so my characters are much more locked in time than yours. We've aged them a little bit just because you can play with it a little bit, where we don't have that kind of change. So I think it's incredible that you have that vehicle where you can change them, where, you know, as far as you can see that kind of future for the characters.
Right.
The relentless deadline is one of my least favorite things. Oh, and as far as all of us here, it's like we have to double up our work before we come to here because there is this is what is not fun about syndication. There's no vacation days. There's no sick days. There's no health benefits. I mean, it is work for hire for me. I know, you know, there's...
Same.
It is. So, like that aspect of it, some people think, you know, as far as being a cartoonist, especially a syndicated cartoonist, oh my God, you have it made. It is, yes, you're contracted, you have, yes, okay, I have this work, it's very much for so many years as far as contract is set, but it isn't work days, it isn't vacation days, it isn't health benefits, anything like that. And that's something I think that should be addressed more for the industry because I know, especially with COVID, it was one of those things where you get sick, who's going to fill in for you? And if the syndicate, well, we need someone else, you know, it isn't there. So that is very hard. What I love about doing the strip is, especially with Flash Gordon, is the international audience. And just with Sally Forth, it's, you know, of course, the national audience. But like right now, there's collections of Flash Gordon of mine being released right now in India and in it's India, and Australia is really big as well. And so you just get fan letters from people from just different cultures and different areas who just respond to your work, where I know, we're all just in our little rooms, and it's fair, especially with COVID, no one sees anyone.
Yeah.
So reader response and audience is really great. If I ever start talking too long, I want you to kick me.
I won't.
Because you're always next. So
But I won't.
I'm done.
Okay.
I'll turn your phone like that.
Yeah, that's my notes. That's my
Jim,
notes. So I know what to
I'll
say.
I'll just tell you to stop talking. Don't worry. Yeah, no worries. Barbara?
So I am an oddball in this panel. I was syndicated from 1991 to 2005. So, and not only was I was syndicated during those years, but I also did a weekly. Ooh. So every 2 weeks I did 2 strips. Handled it. I didn't have to, it wasn't a daily. It was I could do 2 strips every other week. But all these other things are true, like you don't have health insurance. You've got to hustle, you got to have another gig, if you want to have health insurance, you got to do all that stuff. But I still loved everything about syndication because it put me on the map, and it's, and I had such a reach. And like you're saying, I was in Canada, I was in South Africa, I was in Barbados, I was in Jamaica. It's like, that was pretty astounding, for me. And I'm just thinking about the aging thing. I didn't age my characters, and now that I picked them back up, I started to age them and like put, bags in their eyes. Like, no, I can't do that. I don't like these. They won't like them. So I took them out. I'm like, so they're still the same, but they're still my voice. It's just not aging as, you have that flexibility as a cartoonist. Yeah.
I think that I want to just kind of highlight a couple things that some of you have said. One of which is the no health insurance, I do think when I told you it was grueling at the beginning, it's because syndication is grueling and it's not for everybody, there are a limited number of spaces. It's a really hard industry to break into. It used to be a thing where I think a lot of people in comics would be like, someday I'm going to be in the newspaper. And I don't know that young people anymore have that same sort of pull to that, just because of the changing shape of newspapers and how we think about comics, and also the ability to put your stuff online and have that.
Yep.
But I think anytime we talk about comics, it's impossible to not talk about the challenges that come with being a professional cartoonist. And Barbara, to your point about the reach of newspapers, I think that it's still true that those things are there. It's just changed so much. So it's really I'm really enjoying listening to all of you answer these questions I put together.
Great.
And you touched on, some of you touched on this in your last answers too, but there are specific challenges of syndication that are not the same for other comics. And I know that you've mostly just, some of you have only done syndication, some of you have done lots of different things. So if you have had specific things that are tricky about syndication that are not tricky in other spaces, I would love to hear about that. So Peter.
Yeah, doing Heathcliff's a full-time job. And I used to have an anchor that I worked with, this guy, Don Wimmer, who works on Rose is Rose, and he was a great guy, real mentor. But now it's a one-man show. I do everything myself. And so it's very time-consuming. But a friend of mine runs a magazine in New Jersey, where I'm from, and it's called Weird New Jersey, and they have just things about, and I was talking to him one time. He had no idea I did Heathcliff. He was like, and he's like, oh, would you do a comic for Weird New Jersey? He's like, just do anything about New Jersey and I'll put it in there. And I was like, okay. So I came up with, I did a couple of running things. I had one called Tales of the Jersey Devil, where I had the Jersey Devil, which is a legend in New Jersey, which has wings, but I made him kind of cool with a goatee. And he's taking a leak at a urinal. And there's a guy next to him he's like, I'm going to tell my grandkids about this. And then I had another one called the Jersey Tomato. It was a sexy little tomato in this guy's garden. And she's always, and this older couple lives there. And there's one I did where the older man has this book open and he's leaning over and the wife's yelling out the window, that better not be more of your erotic poetry. So anyway, those were fun. It was easy to do. I could do anything. And Heathcliff, I have to do stick with the character, and also it's a single panel, so it doesn't really have story, continuity. But I try to do certain things, and I really tried to take it like in different directions, having like robots and I have a man-eating giant in it now, and like all these crazy things. But it's super fun, and like I said before too, the Syndicate has never said to me, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, this is a beloved comic strip. You're destroying it." So so those are the differences, I think. The freedom of doing some other stuff and doing that. But I love doing it, but it's still it's more rigid, the rules and stuff.
You know what you need? You need a balloon that looks like Heathcliff's gum, so that it looks like he's flying as well.
Definitely. I know. I should hand them out to everybody.
Yeah, I love it.
I knew this would happen. I knew it would turn into a Heathcliff panel.
I really like Heathcliff. It's just very surreal and very strange in the best way. I think there are two really tricky things about it. So I've done single issue comics, graphic novels, zines, pretty much any way you can make a comic, I've done it. And I find that syndicated comics are very, very tight when it comes to trim size. It's 2 inches by 6 inches, and that's all you got, So coming from a place where I can really utilize the entire page and think about full composition is not something that I do with Heart of the City. And so it took me a little bit of time to get used to that and start figuring out ways for me to get creative within that small space. And then another thing I find is tricky is, I guess, not really knowing what's okay for a newspaper or not, because on the one hand, I've got an arc where Dean lies to his friends that he's a cousin of Keanu Reeves, which is like a typical middle schooler lie, And it's like, that's something that I thought was like pretty out there. And, Sheena was like, no, that's great. We love it. Go for it. But on the other hand, it's like, I have questions of like, I don't know if you should make it where Dean explains that there's no tooth fairy, because what if it's like you telling kids there's no tooth fairy? And I was like, well, they should know. Like I'm not too concerned about that. So yeah, thinking about like what's something that someone from who's picking up a newspaper, will they have a good chuckle out of it? Would it be worthwhile for them? And how extreme can I get with their shenanigans? So it's nice to be able to play with it and figure out how I can keep pushing it. Eventually, I'll have to just include Heathcliff, honestly.
Of course. Definitely. Let's do a crossover.
Let's do
I see
it.
that happening now.
I've done a crossover with Nancy because I love Nancy too. So let's do it.
I love, just quickly, I've done like thrown in even Garfield. I've had Garfield.
That whole series that you did with all those different cats, I actually emailed Sheena and I was like, I need to know how he's allowed to do this because this is incredible. And Sheena was like, I don't know, it's not my syndicate.
Right, people are always like, are you going to get sued? I was like, I don't think so. I had Heathcliff, his celebrity crush was the Utz potato chip girl.
So generally how that works is you put a little apologies too. Whoever,
I know.
And then it's fine. And it's like, I'm not a lawyer.
Sorry.
But
Right.
Yeah, anyway, Jim.
Yeah, right.
Syndication.
Well, first of all, Weird New Jersey, being that Joe Kubert School is in Jersey, we know about that magazine, and we've had cartoonists submit to that.
Yeah.
But as far as what's are you allowed to put into a strip? It is weird, and I love talking to other cartoonists, because it is like, especially for syndicated cartoons, you're working with such a small space that that sense of design and everything, exactly what you were saying. And the tooth fairy, like, do you say as far as?
Yeah, look, if you read a book and you find out the tooth fairy isn't real from a newspaper, at least you got it from the newspaper. That's where news is.
That'd be big news. Too.
Yeah, breaking news, tooth fairy.
Getting letters. Those comment section on Go Comics is gonna go nuts.
Oh my God.
But as far as like what you can put into it, I find, so where I am in Minnesota, my daughter, hi Tessa, she went to Washburn High School, and a big Somali immigrant group there, and so like I draw what I see. So for Hillary being in school, you draw like their classroom. So I would have like these girls in hijabs. And as far as what you can put in the paper, I really didn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
I didn't think of anything of it at all. But then all of a sudden, you just start getting these emails and letters and comments where you're, especially with the political divide right now, as far as who should be here and who shouldn't, and it just gets ugly really quick. So you get that aspect of it, like, hey, how dare you put that in the strip? And then I got this really lovely letter from this woman. It was like, my daughter wears this hijab to school, and I just love that you have that in the strip. You didn't make something, it wasn't like a focus of the strip. It was just there, and that's, it was just, that's a part of life. And what you were saying, like you seeing people you could, that in the paper you could relate to, I think for so long, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm like a white male. And, syndication, especially in the 80s when I was in there, it was Lynn Johnson, it was Kathy Guys-White. There were so few even female cartoonists, much less people of color. So you just do have one certain perspective. And there's some people who really, break the ceiling on this kind of stuff, which is it's so needed. So as far as like things which deal with that, I think that's something, things you have to put up with when doing a strip.
Yes. So I'm thinking about what everybody's been saying. Again, I'm the oddball, but it's okay because I came up with my own space. It's like I created it. I wanted it larger, and like I said, I created for a magazine initially, so it was larger. And most of the rejections said, "What are we going to do with this? This is the wrong size. You got to have panels. You got to have bodies. You have to have environments. You have to, all these things." I was like, I do? And Lee was like, I like it, and since I already got one paper, Detroit Free Press, and I was in it for, almost 2 years. I mean, a year and then 2 years after I was syndicated. They allowed me to be in this large space, do it the way I wanted to do it. And when it didn't fit a comic page that a newspaper wanted, sometimes it was stretched out, and the characters were like, which I was fine. They would pay in, the bill. But also, what was oddball about my stuff? Well, I don't mean it was oddball about my stuff. My experience was different because I was encouraged to be more daring, and I mean I knew that you had to stay to a place where newspapers could accept it because. I think there was only one time a newspaper said they weren't going to run one of mine, and it was some kind of ready-made family jab, and their mayor was going through something, and they thought I was talking about him. I'm like,
I don't even know you.
Again, there's a chance. So he's like, well, hold up a mirror to him, see how he feels about that. Like that's all you're doing really is holding up a mirror. Yeah. But I was encouraged to do more. But I had in my mind that certain things you can't do. And now that I'm doing it on my own, I don't have a syndicate, and I'm doing things I want to do, I can even curse. I'm like, I can say whatever I want, the way I want to say it, and not worry about, who's, big brother telling me what's right and what's wrong.
So I sent you guys a list of questions, and it wasn't that many because I was like, oh, there's 4 of you, and we will not get through all of them. And I was right. We're not going to get through all of them. But the amazing thing is that you keep incorporating answers that I would have asked in other questions.
That's great.
Because we were thinking about your
I
questions.
know. It's amazing. Like, we've done an amazing job. I think take a moment. So what I want to make sure that we get through before we get to the Q&A part, so we have like 10 more minutes of talking and then 10 minutes of Q&A. I do want to give you guys a chance to talk about like the stuff that you're working on that is not this stuff. And I want to start with you, Barbara, because I know that you, like, I'm so happy you're on this panel because I think it's really important to have like, I don't want 4 of the same people on a panel. I want people who have like been in cartooning for, in different times and in different ways. And like the stuff that you're talking about also, like, if Lee likes your stuff is good. Yeah. That's easy. So when she says Lee, she means Lee Salem, who was the head of Universal Press Syndicate for a really long time and like just a giant in the industry and has passed away since the start of the pandemic. And anyway, like everything that he like did, comics have a lot comics owes a lot to Lee Salem. So anyway, but talk about your other stuff. Like, what are you excited about? What are you working on? Brag.
I can brag. This is my brag time. So I get a call from Drawn and Quarterly, a publisher in Canada that does all these incredible graphic novels and this and that. And she found me on Facebook, for crying out loud. And I was like, so, love to hate Facebook. But, and she said, we really think there needs to be a collection of your work because, with newspapers dying, nobody's going to understand the importance of newspapers, let alone the importance of comics and newspapers and how much what we got across in our comics. And so they are putting out a collection of my work. It's a I like to say this, an origin book. I think I'm in Marvel Comics or something. It's like, this is telling my whole story about how I got started, about I talk about how I was rejected, and also the, when I got accepted, and and I started moving on, and the years of it, and then I can reflect. There's this part of me reflecting on those years and where I am now, and the new things that I do that I put out on Instagram. I don't know how to work this stuff, but I put it on Instagram, and enough people see it, and also a professor. It's an essay in there, a long essay about how I fit in history. And so that's what I have. And hold on just a second. I know we don't have a lot of time. And I have it in plastic because I'm just like that. But ta-da!
Okay.
So if you want my whole story, it's here.
Oh, that's
Years. Isn't this nice?
That's beautiful. Yes, it is.
So there. That's what I'm doing.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
awesome.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness.
We're gonna take it.
No.
You've never
Guys,
seen
don't
this
spill
again.
anything on it.
Yeah.
Oh my
It's out of
God.
plastic.
Oh, yeah.
No, I had it in baggie.
It's so good. It's so good.
I'm going to use some of my time to talk about your book for a second. That is autobiographical? That's
Yeah,
like
it's really-
it's not reprints of old strips. This
It is reprints of old strips. It's from my it's a selected number of the 14 years I was syndicated.
Oh, okay.
So it's those. So you see that when I started out and then after that, which is pages and pages, because 14 years, even when it's a weekly, it's a lot of strips, 52 times whatever the math
No,
is.
that-
But it's a
it
lot.
adds up.
Yeah. It does add up. And then I have some of the newer things that I put out in the back. And, pictures, all kinds of stuff. It really is, tells a story.
Yeah. Freaking buy this book.
Buy the book.
Yeah. Oh, shoot. I
Comes
love
out in
this kind of
February,
stuff.
but it can be pre-ordered. Yes. Yes.
Okay, so stress by the book. When we were talking about the limited size constraints of this comic strip and such, years ago, it was literally years ago, Band of Brothers came out, and my dad was actually in Patton's Third. And I was talking to my mom, and my dad had passed away from cancer some time ago. But it was like, yeah, that was an incredible show. And my mom said, oh, it's amazing. I thought it reminded me just like those photos your dad has, and as far as from back when. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she showed me this suitcase which had all these old photos from him from the war, and just this huge history. He was my dad. We went fishing, we did that kind of stuff. And it was at a certain time where I was able to go out, because my mom had a list of like, oh, your dad, had a Christmas list of people he knew from the war who he would correspond with at Christmas, And I contacted him and I said, can you tell me like who are in these pictures and who, just all about this from, not just like from first person, like these are the people he served with. And I would like to do a graphic narrative, and I've been just working on years researching and doing work on it. Wow. I do not have a book ready like she does. This is the one to buy right now.
But his is to come.
Yeah, mine's to come. But yes, that's what I'm working on, because I love the idea when you say the size constraints of a strip. I just want to work big and do a story, a narrative like that.
I'm always working on something. always. So obviously I'm doing Heart currently, and book 2 of that comes out in April, so that's really exciting. Thank you. I am also working on a graphic novel called Side Quest. It's a graphic novel history of tabletop role-playing games. Yeah, so we go as far back as Han Dynasty China all the way up until today, and we talk about really the background and the history of gaming, storytelling, role-playing, how it fits in with psychology, how it fits in with sociology. So eventually it'll be finished. Before I came here, I finished exactly half of the inks, so I am halfway done with that. I'm also working on a mini comic for Unico. I don't know if people know Unico, the Tezuka series. So I'm really excited to be doing that.
I didn't know.
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
Do you sleep?
Yes, I actually get great sleep. I get 8 to 10 hours every night. I'm a sleepy baby. It's true. So yeah, I'm doing that as well. And then I also am now on the committee for the St. Louis Small Press Expo. So that's a small con that was going on for about 5 years before the pandemic started. And so we're revving it back up again, and I'm going to be on the event planning committee, so we're looking for venues and whatnot for that. So I'm just happy to be able to serve my community again now that people are able to leave their homes.
Yeah.
And my program, Comics University, which I organized, I have been doing that program for like 8 years, and every summer you can learn something about comics. And so I'm hoping that in the next few years, when I'm a little less busy, I guess, or not, I'd like to get that started back up again too, because education about comics is like really, really important to me. So yeah, that's what I'm working on.
Wow. It makes me tired. Wow.
I teach as an adjunct professor in New Jersey at Montclair State University.
Yeah, Professor
I teach a
Ace.
couple of classes. I've done it for like 12 years. And I love it. It's just one day a week, but like when you're sitting in your studio by yourself all the time, I find I go and I teach, and it's like 2 illustration classes, and I get so energized by the students, and I come home and I'm like buzzing, like after sitting in the, so I love doing that. I also, when I finish my Heathcliff work over the years, I have like some notebooks, and I'll just kind of go crazy and do my own stuff just to kind of get it out, and I would love to put that stuff together, and like I had like one of the ideas, like it's just a bunch of different ideas for strips and stuff, and one of them is this thing, Space Bros. And it's these kind of drawn in like a Jack Kirby style, if I could, and all the dialogue in the entire strip is just bro, like like that.
yeah,
So,
I can't wait.
anyway, it probably won't last that long.
I like it.
Yeah, that's really, really
That's
great.
a limited series.
so-
Yeah, I
and
love
and
that.
hopefully I'm talking to some people, maybe getting a Heathcliff compilation book together and stuff like that, so we'll see.
Nice. Oh, there's another thing that I'm also trying to work on is I've been thinking of doing this project called King of Hobbies. Don't steal it. I'm using it. I get into a subculture that is not my own, and I try and really mire myself in that world, and then I end it by going to a convention based on that, and then I do a comic based on my studies and exploration. So I already did this with
that's
coin collecting. So no interest in coin collecting, and then I was like, I love coins now. So I like went to a coin show and met all the people that do that sort of thing, and I would love to do that with other hobbies and other subcultures, because I just think it's really exciting to figure out what is it that makes a community thrive and live. And with coin collecting, it's really all about finding something that you love, no matter how small it is, and really just jumping in and getting right into it. I find that there's a lot of hobbies that it's like not like that, but with coin collecting, people are just so excited about it. So
Oh, that's a great idea.
King of Hobbies, one day.
Yeah.
So we're gonna open it up for some Q&A, very brief, 10 minutes of Q&A. What we're gonna do is you ask the question, I will repeat the question into the microphone. I say this for myself as well for you, and then they will answer. Okay, Caitlin.
I think there's some mystique around like the process of doing a syndicated comic strip, as far as like how far out in advance do you have to work?
Mhm.
So if you could each talk a little bit about that, and I'm sure maybe that's changed over time, time with the internet or not at all?
So Caitlin is asking about deadlines for syndicated comics. Like, what are they? How far out are they?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm an outlier.
You're on time.
Yeah, time management is my number one skill. And yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
She's sitting on her cape.
Well, I went to a show at ALA, and Michelle Obama said, "You can have it all, just not all at once." And I was like, "This is it. I'm making that happen." But I work pretty far ahead. I actually write my stories in 3-month chunks. So I do 3 months of storyline, and then I send it to Shena, and they go through it, and they're like, "This is good, fix that, fix that." And then by the time it comes around where it's time for me to work on that week, I already have it written. And so about 4 weeks beforehand, I send the dailies. And then about 6 weeks beforehand is when I send off the Sundays. Because, not all newspapers get dailies and Sundays. So you have to be very deliberate about how you pace your comics, how you put them all together so that it still fits, it still works, but someone who picks up a newspaper isn't like, what am I reading, So yeah, I work pretty far in advance. I think currently I'm on, what is the 6th month? June? Okay, so I'm on June of 2023 right now. Yeah.
I cannot stress to you, like, this is outlier behavior.
Yeah.
This is not normal behavior. This is not the experience of
I don't like waking up and being like, what am I doing today? I have a planned to-do list
She's
every
incredible.
single morning. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
I get plenty of sleep. I love it.
That's why she has this clear brain.
yeah. That's amazing. I mean, I think, because I do a daily and Sunday as well, and I'm probably about the same, like 4 weeks ahead for dailies and
Yeah.
6 for Sundays. But like you guys are different because you have a plot,
Right.
and it's different. With me, I'm just throwing out
Yep.
crazy ideas, and it's like, but like to follow a plot, you plan it out. That's amazing, and
Yeah.
to be that far ahead is insane.
Yeah, I have so many ideas that I want to make sure get written down because I don't want to forget them. And I always feel like if I don't work ahead, I know myself, I just won't do it, So
Right.
it has to happen. That's why I chose actually to keep Heart of the City being very plot focused rather than current events.
That's
Because it's stressful to think about if I write this current event gag, will it still be relevant 6 weeks from now?
Yeah.
Things
I don't
change so
want to
fast.
have
No,
that
you get
thought.
burned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I'm just not going to touch it whatsoever.
Right. Yeah.
And Jim, I'd love to get your take on that too, because your process is going to be a little different because you're an artist who's working with a writer on a thing.
Yeah, I
versus-
work with Francesco Marsciuliano. He's been writing it. I came on when he was already writing it. I was writer and artist on Flash, so it's kind of I can focus just on the art for the strip I'm working on now. But it's like a month for the dailies, month and a half for the Sundays. Used to be longer because it had to be FedEx and all that kind of stuff.
Remember?
But once, and oh my God, FedEx to digital was, everyone thought, oh, we can send in our stuff later, and syndicates were like, no, you guys are late enough as it is. But the problem, once again, with if you're 4 weeks ahead or a month and a half, whatever, it is also a situation of if we have a convention to go to, if we get sick, if anything happens to that schedule, it can throw you off. You can't just like, oh, now I'll just do 2 weeks next week.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. It can throw you off immensely. So it's nice to be that, month and a half. But if you have a little more breathing room, which, say working for how many years ahead?
Just 6 months.
6 months. But it is, that kind of breathing
25.
room is invaluable. Like
Yeah.
that's the way to do it, because you don't, if you get sick or something happens, you're going to get screwed.
Absolutely.
I'll say when I was doing it, which was in, back in the day, like I said, I had a weekly, so I didn't have that much pressure. So every other week I did 2 weeks, and we were probably like a month in advance. And you get fined if you're late,
Yeah.
I was only late once, and I was very good with my one strip a week. So, there's no excuse, Barbara, but, there's always an excuse. But But yeah, you do get fined if you're late. Yeah, and
Yeah, I think Bloom County, Burke Breathitt was well known for being like, oh, it's due next week in the paper.
Yeah.
Like he had
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
getting
so was
fined
Aaron
all the time.
Magruder. He was like, he could not
Yeah.
keep up with that
Yeah.
pace. I mean, he's brilliant as he is. He couldn't keep up with that pace. So
Some
of a
people
daily
need the
strip.
deadline. Like for some people, the deadline is part of the process. Like
Yeah.
Richard
Yes.
Thompson needed the deadline. He
Yeah.
could not work without it. Like
Yeah.
you could not get him to work ahead.
Yeah.
It just was impossible.
Yeah,
So,
and there's
yeah.
some. I worked on staff before being syndicated, and there's some cartoonists who, decades and decades, they're always late, no
Yeah.
matter
Yeah.
what.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some are well ahead of schedule and have breathing room for themselves.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
I think of it as like if it is on a calendar, it's not in my head. And I need my head to be as clear as possible so I can really focus and be in the moment. And if I'm constantly thinking about all the things I have to do, I'm not
Oh.
going to have that. So that's why
No,
I put
it's
it on the
detrimental.
calendar, forget about it. And then
Yeah.
the day it happens, I'm prepared.
Yeah. And I have friends who are like, you mean if you just sit down and come up with a million ideas, you can take a vacation? I'm like, yeah, in theory. It was possible to do that. You try it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have time for like the smallest question. If anybody has like, okay, you had your hand up earlier.
I just wanted to ask, do you all have a favorite syndicated comic or one that very much inspired your work specifically?
Okay, I'm going to repeat that for the group. Do they have a favorite syndicated comic strip or one that particularly inspires them? Peter.
Back in the day, I used to love Herman by Jim Unger. I thought it was so bizarre and hilarious. Like, I remember there was one where he drew these big lumpy guys, and there was a guy dressed in a bee costume and a bunch of flowers, and a policeman's like, for the last time I told you, get out of those flowers. Like, I thought he was hilarious, and many others, but that guy I thought was so crazy. It was great.
When I was growing up, it was Curtis, it was Pearls Before Swine, Zits. Oh, Zits, perfection. It's so good. It's so good. Nowadays, I know I'm going to say this and it's going to be very embarrassing, but I love Heathcliff so much. It's just like, it makes me think I need to be weirder. You know, like if Heathcliff can do it, so can I, bro. So yeah, I'm reading that as well, and then one that is new and you all should be reading is Crabgrass by Tawhid Bandia.
Yeah.
It is so good. I think he just got his syndication deal, right? Recently.
Well, we launched him in newspapers earlier this year. He got a
Yes.
syndication deal a while ago because
Okay.
development takes time. And his book just came out. So
Yes.
he is in like over 200 papers.
Yeah.
He's got a book out.
He's great.
Huge deal. Like you should definitely read
It's
it
so
online.
funny and
Yeah.
so cute. It's about these elementary school kids, and I think it takes place in the 80s, right?
80s or 90s.
80s or
like
90s.
It's the recent but unspecified past. No cell
Yeah,
phones.
the less internet past.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good one if anyone's looking for a new one to try. Crabgrass.
I gotta take notes. I, having done Flash Gordon, I love the old adventure strips. I just love them. I love the old comic strips where there was room for so much detail. Newer strips, you mentioned Jim Borgman, who does Zits. Jerry Scott writes it, I believe.
Yeah.
Jim Borgman, just an incredible cartoonist. What he
Unreal.
can make the characters do and such. And just to go to the classics, because they have the exhibit for Peanuts across, over at the Billy Ireland right now. It's just breathtaking what he was able to do in that comic strip. And I know everyone loves Peanuts, but it's not a surprise. But I think sometimes it's almost taken for granted. It's like, oh yeah, Charles Schultz, Peanuts, love it. But it is just looking at it as a cartoonist. Yeah, I just am blown away about what he was able to do in that strip.
And I'm glad you said that. Mentioned the Billy Ireland, because my dad and myself, we have an exhibit at the Billy Ireland. It's called Still, Racism in America, a retrospective in cartoons. And of course, my dad was a great influence on me. And if you guys get a chance to go over to the Billy Ireland before October 23rd, you will see this exhibit, and you will see my dad was incredible.
Yeah.
He did Luther, as a strip, as a syndicated strip. But he did so much more for the Black press before Luther, the Black press after Luther, and also Florida Today. He wrote a column and did strips for that. But we talk about the same issues, and it's pretty amazing to realize that in 1966, my dad was talking about this, and in 1983, I mentioned it, or later than that, because I was anyway. You get the point. 30 years apart, we were talking about the same issues, and it's all there. So I have to say, my dad was a biggest influence, but I also love Jules Pfeiffer, and it was his weekly strip. Like, weekly. It's like I could use this spirit. I was like, I like that. The characters are often talking straight to the reader, which I used, but I was very influenced by that. Yeah.
Well, I love how your exhibit also you have that whole section where it's like Maury Turner, Ray Billingsley,
Yes.
you have Jerry Craft,
Yes.
you have you just highlight them all.
Yeah, and because a lot of people don't know that that's a practice that cartoonists do, is that they gift each other their comics, and so things that were gifted to my dad, and things that were gifted to me, and people of note, we're like, let's put them in this exhibit. So that was part of that, looking at the time frame and letting people know that's what cartoonists do.
It's
Thank
a great
you.
show. That's
Yep.
terrific.
Thanks.
Okay, so syndicated cartooning is weird and hard, and everyone here is doing an amazing job on it. Go to the Billy Ireland. It's awesome.
Yes.
And thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you so much to you guys for
Coming.
coming.
Thank you.